Welcome to this profoundly tedious exploration of the daily life of ancient Roman soldiers. We will proceed with deliberate slowness through every mundane, repetitive, and thoroughly unremarkable aspect of military life in the Roman legions. Far from the dramatic image of conquering heroes, Roman soldiers spent most of their time engaged in boring routine, tedious labour, and mind-numbing repetition. Prepare yourself for an exhaustive examination of military monotony so comprehensive that sleep will seem like a blessed escape from this relentless catalogue of Roman soldierly dullness. Chapter 1. Waking and Morning Routine. Let us begin with the start of the Roman soldier's day, which began early and began in the same way every single day, with monotonous predictability that would quickly become soul-crushing through endless repetition. The soldier would wake in his tent or barracks to the sound of a trumpet call signalling the beginning of the day. This trumpet call occurred at the same time each morning just before dawn, regardless of season, weather, or the soldier's state of rest. The soldier would be sleeping on a simple wooden bed frame or on the ground on a mat, depending on whether he was in permanent barracks or in a marching camp. The bed, if present, would have a thin mattress stuffed with straw or hay. This provided minimal cushioning and was not comfortable by any modern standard. The straw would compress over time, making the bed even harder. It would also harbour insects, fleas, lice, bed bugs that would bite during the night. Upon waking, the soldier would not leap energetically from bed. He would be stiff from sleeping on the hard surface. His muscles would ache from the previous day's activities. He might be cold, as Roman military camps and barracks were not heated. Even in warmer climates, the early morning hours before sunrise were cool. The soldier would need a moment to fully wake and gather himself to begin the day. The first physical action would be sitting up. This simple movement required effort when the body was stiff and the sleeping surface hard. The soldier would swing his legs off the bed or mat and place his feet on the ground. The ground would be cold, whether it was the packed earth floor of a tent or the stone or concrete floor of barracks. The coldness of the floor would travel up through the feet, providing an unpleasant wake-up sensation. The soldier would then stand, which required overcoming the stiffness in joints and muscles. Standing quickly might cause dizziness from the sudden change in position. Standing slowly would prolong the uncomfortable transition from lying down to being upright. Either way, the process of getting up was not pleasant, particularly on cold mornings or after days of hard marching or labour. Once standing, the soldier would need to dress. He had slept in a tunic, the basic Roman garment, essentially a knee-length shirt. This tunic would be rumpled and probably damp with sweat from sleeping. The soldier might or might not have another tunic to change into. If he did, he would remove the sleeping tunic and put on the day tunic. If not, he would simply wear the same tunic all day. The tunic would be made of wool or linen. Wool was more common for soldiers as it was durable and warm when dry. However, wool directly against skin could be itchy. The tunic would not be clean by modern standards. Laundry was infrequent. The tunic would have the accumulated smell of sweat, body odour, and general grime from days or weeks of wear. The soldier would be accustomed to this smell, but it would nonetheless be present. Over the tunic, the soldier would put on his military belt, called a beltius. This belt was not just for holding up clothing, but was a piece of military equipment. It was made of leather with metal fittings. The belt held the scabbard for the soldier's sword on one side. It also had metal-studded leather straps hanging from it that protected the groin area. Putting on the belt meant buckling it around the waist, adjusting it to fit properly, ensuring the sword hung correctly, and arranging the protective straps. The soldier would then put on his military footwear called calige. These were heavy leather sandals with hobnails, iron studs on the soles. The calige were constructed from multiple layers of leather strapped and laced around the foot and ankle. Putting them on required lacing or buckling the straps properly. The process took time, particularly with cold fingers in the morning. The calige were not comfortable footwear. The leather straps could chafe. The hobnails made walking on hard surfaces noisy and slippery. The open construction meant that feet were exposed to cold, rain, mud and dust. In cold weather, feet would become numb. In hot weather, feet would become dusty and dirty. In wet weather, feet would become soaked and would develop blisters and fungal infections. After dressing, the soldier would need to attend to basic hygiene and bodily functions. Urination would be the immediate need after sleeping through the night. The soldier would go to the latrines, communal toilet facilities in permanent camps or simple trenches in marching camps. These latrines were open structures with no privacy. Multiple soldiers would use them simultaneously, sitting on wooden benches with holes cut in them, positioned side by side. The latrines smelled terrible. They were cleaned periodically, but the smell of human waste was ever present. The soldier would conduct his business as quickly as possible to minimize time in this unpleasant location. Toilet paper did not exist. Instead, communal sponges on sticks, soaked in vinegar or salt water, would be used for cleaning. These sponges were shared among all the soldiers using the latrine. The use of communal sponges for cleaning after defecation is one of the stranger aspects of Roman military life. The soldier would use the sponge, then rinse it in the bucket of vinegar or salt water, leaving it for the next person. The hygienic implications are obvious to modern people, but Romans did not understand disease transmission and saw nothing wrong with this practice. The soldier would simply accept this as normal. After using the latrine, the soldier would wash his hands and face. Washing facilities in camps consisted of water troughs or basins. The soldier would splash cold water on his face and hands. The water was cold because heating water was not routine for basic washing. The cold water was unpleasant but also bracing, helping to complete the waking up process. The soldier would not have soap in the modern sense. Washing was done with just water, perhaps with some oil or grit to help remove dirt. There was no shaving of beards in the early Roman period, but by the imperial period Roman soldiers were generally clean-shaven. This meant that shaving was part of the morning routine. The soldier would use a razor, a sharp metal blade without the safety features of modern razors. Shaving would be done with water, possibly with some oil to lubricate the blade, but without shaving cream or foam. The shaving process was time-consuming and uncomfortable. The razor was sharp enough to cut hair, but also to cut skin easily. Shaving without a mirror in cold water with a blade that might not be ideally sharp, on a face still puffy from sleep, resulted in frequent small cuts. These cuts would sting, might bleed for a while, and could become infected. The soldier would shave because Roman military regulations required it, not because it was pleasant. After washing and shaving, the soldier would return to his sleeping area to complete preparations for the day. If he had any possessions to organize or equipment to check, he would do so now. Most soldiers had few personal possessions, perhaps a spare tunic, some personal items, letters from home if literate. These would be kept in a pack or bag. The soldier would ensure these items were secure and properly stored. The morning routine, from waking to being fully dressed and ready for the day, would take perhaps 30 minutes to an hour. This routine was the same every morning. The soldier would wake at the same time, dress in the same way, use the same latrines with the same sponges, wash in the same cold water, shave with the same uncomfortable razor, and prepare for a day that would be much like the previous day and the day before that. The monotony was comprehensive and began the moment of waking. Chapter 2. Morning Roll Call and Inspection. After completing his morning routine, the soldier would proceed to the morning assembly for roll call and inspection. This daily ritual was another unchanging element of military life, conducted with the same procedure every single morning regardless of weather, season, or circumstances. The assembly would occur at a designated location within the camp or fort, typically an open area where the entire unit could gather. The soldiers would form up in their designated positions. Each soldier knew exactly where to stand based on his century, cohort, and position within those units. The Roman legion was organized hierarchically, legions divided into cohorts, cohorts divided into centuries, centuries containing around 80 men despite the name suggesting 100. Each soldier had a specific place in this hierarchy and would stand in that place during assembly. The formation process itself took time. Hundreds or thousands of men moving to their assigned positions created organized chaos. Soldiers would walk from their tents or barracks to the assembly area. They would find their units and their places within those units. There would be jostling as people moved past each other. There would be waiting as those who arrived early stood while latecomers found their spots. The entire process was orderly but slow. Once formed up, the soldiers would stand at attention. Standing at attention meant standing straight, feet together, arms at sides, facing forward. This position had to be maintained for the duration of the roll call and inspection, which could take a considerable time for a large unit. Standing motionless for extended periods is physically uncomfortable. Muscles tire, feet ache. The temptation to shift position is strong but had to be resisted. The centurion, the officer commanding a sentry, would conduct the roll call for his unit. He would go through the list of soldiers in his command, calling each name. Each soldier would respond when his name was called, typically with a simple "present" or similar acknowledgement. The centurion would note any absences and the reasons for them: sick, on duty elsewhere, or unauthorized absence, which was a serious offence. The roll call proceeded methodically through the entire unit. Each name was called, each response was heard, each name was checked off. For a century of 80 men, this process took several minutes. For an entire cohort or legion, the roll calls of individual sentries would occur simultaneously, creating a murmur of voices as centurions called names, and soldiers responded throughout the formation. After roll call came inspection. The centurion would walk among his men, examining each soldier individually. He would check that the soldier was properly dressed and groomed. The tunic should be worn correctly. The belt should be properly fastened with sword and protective straps in place. The caligy should be properly laced. The face should be shaved. The hair should be cut to regulation length. The centurion would also check for cleanliness to the extent possible. The tunic should be as clean as circumstances allowed. The soldier's visible skin should be washed. The equipment should be maintained. The centurion's standards for these inspections would be high because military discipline required uniformity and proper appearance. A soldier whose appearance was inadequate would be reprimanded and possibly punished. The inspection proceeded slowly as the centurion examined each soldier individually. The soldier being inspected would stand rigidly at attention while the officer looked him over. The centurion might walk around the soldier, examining from different angles. He might check the sword to ensure it was sharp and properly maintained. He might examine the caligae to ensure they were adequately repaired and the hobnails were not excessively worn. For soldiers whose appearance was unsatisfactory, the centurion would point out the deficiency. Perhaps the face was not cleanly shaved. Perhaps the sword was not sharp enough. Perhaps the caligae were too worn. The soldier would be ordered to correct the problem. Repeated failures to maintain proper appearance would result in punishment, extra duties, reduced rations, physical punishment like beatings, or in severe cases, execution for serious breaches of discipline. While waiting for his personal inspection, each soldier stood at attention watching the centurion inspect others. This meant more standing motionless, more feet aching, more muscles tiring. The soldier could not relax until the entire inspection was complete and the unit was dismissed. The duration of inspection depended on the unit's size and the centurion's thoroughness, but it invariably took substantial time. After inspecting the men themselves, some centurions would also inspect equipment that was not being worn. Armour, shields, helmets, javelins, and other military gear would be laid out for inspection. The centurion would check that these items were properly maintained. Metal should be free of rust. Leather should be oiled and supple. Wood should be free of cracks. Any deficiencies would be noted and the soldier responsible would be ordered to make repairs. The inspection of equipment added more time to the morning assembly. Each piece of gear had to be examined. The centurion would check helmets for dents that could weaken them. He would check armour for broken rivets or damaged plates. He would check shields for splits in the wood or loose fittings. He would check javelins for straight shafts and sharp points. This detailed examination was time-consuming but was considered necessary for military readiness. Throughout this entire process, formation, roll call, personal inspection, equipment inspection, the soldiers simply stood and waited. For much of the time, each individual soldier was doing nothing but standing at attention, while the centurion attended to other soldiers. This waiting was boring but unavoidable. The soldier's mind might wander, but his body had to remain motionless. Any fidgeting or obvious inattention might attract the centurion's unfavourable notice. The morning assembly and inspection occurred every single day without exception. Whether in permanent barracks or temporary marching camps, whether in friendly territory or enemy territory, whether rested or exhausted from the previous day, the soldiers assembled for roll call and inspection. The sameness of this ritual, repeated daily for the soldiers' entire years of service, contributed to the monotony of military life. After inspection was complete and found satisfactory, the centurion would dismiss the unit or would announce the day's duties. The soldiers would then break formation and proceed to whatever activities were scheduled. But before any work could begin, before any training could commence, before any tasks could be undertaken, the boring ritual of morning roll call and inspection had to be completed in full, taking an hour or more of every single morning. Chapter 3. The Tedium of Construction and Maintenance. Once morning roll call and inspection were complete, the soldiers would typically be assigned to their day's duties. For Roman soldiers, these duties very frequently involved construction and maintenance work rather than military training or combat. The Roman army was essentially a massive construction and engineering force that occasionally fought battles. The soldiers spent far more time building than fighting. The construction of marching camps was a daily task when the army was on campaign. Every evening, when the army stopped for the night, a fortified camp had to be built. Every morning, this camp was abandoned, and in the evening, a new camp was built at the new location. This cycle repeated every single day of a campaign. The soldiers who had marched all day would then spend hours constructing the camp before they could rest. The marching camp followed a standardized layout. It was rectangular or square, surrounded by a ditch and an earthen rampart topped with a palisade of wooden stakes. The construction began with surveying and marking out the camp boundaries. Officers would determine the layout and mark where the defences should be. Then the real labour began. Digging the ditch was hard physical work. The soldiers used tools, picks to break up the ground, shovels to move the soil. The ditch needed to be wide and deep enough to impede attackers. This meant moving substantial amounts of earth. Each soldier would be assigned a section of ditch to dig. He would swing his pick to loosen the soil, then shovel the loosened soil out of the growing ditch. This work continued until his section reached the required depth and width. The soil removed from the ditch was not discarded but was used to build the rampart. The soldiers would carry the soil from the ditch to the inner side of the camp perimeter and pile it up. This created an earthen wall behind the ditch. The rampart needed to be high enough and thick enough to provide defensive protection. Building it required moving all the soil that had been removed from the ditch, one shovelful at a time. The work of digging ditches and building ramparts was exhausting. Swinging a pick repeatedly strained the arms, shoulders and back. Shoveling soil was similarly strenuous. Carrying soil to build the rampart added more physical effort. The work continued for hours until the defences were complete. The soldiers would be sweating, tired and dirty by the time the work was done. After the ditch and rampart were complete, the palisade had to be erected. Each soldier carried 2 or 3 wooden stakes as part of his marching equipment. These stakes would be sharpened at one end. They would be set into the top of the rampart side by side, creating a wooden fence that would further impede attackers. Setting the stakes required positioning them correctly and driving them firmly into the earth so they would not fall. Inside the camp perimeter, tents had to be erected. The leather tents were heavy and unwieldy. Setting them up required multiple soldiers working together. The tent leather would be spread out. Poles would be positioned, guy ropes would be staked down, the tent would be raised and adjusted until it was properly erected. This process had to be repeated for every tent needed to house the army. All of this construction work, surveying, ditching, building ramparts, setting palisades, erecting tents, had to be completed every evening. When the army was on campaign and marching daily, this meant several hours of hard construction labour at the end of each day's march. The soldiers would be tired from marching all day, but they would immediately begin the exhausting work of building the camp. Only after the camp was complete and secure could they rest. In permanent forts and bases, the construction work was different but equally extensive. Stone fortifications had to be built. Barracks had to be constructed. Roads had to be laid. Drainage systems had to be dug. Storage buildings had to be erected. Walls had to be maintained. The work was ongoing and never-ending. Stone construction required quarrying stone, transporting it to the construction site, shaping it and setting it in place. Quarrying meant breaking stone from natural deposits using picks, wedges and hammers. The stone pieces would be rough and irregular. They would need to be shaped into more regular forms for construction. This shaping was done by stonemasons among the soldiers, hammering and chiselling each stone into the required shape. Transporting stone from quarry to construction site required moving heavy weights over distances. Stone is extremely heavy. A block of stone that two men could lift and carry would weigh 100 pounds or more. Larger stones required more men, or required the use of carts, wagons, or sledges. Moving stone was exhausting work that consumed countless hours of soldier labour. At the construction site, the shaped stones would be set in place according to the design. This required precision. Stones had to be positioned correctly and levelled. Mortar would be used to bind the stones together. The mortar had to be mixed from lime, sand, and water, which was another labour task. The stone setting and mortar work would proceed layer by layer as walls rose higher or as roads extended longer. The construction of roads was another major task for Roman soldiers. Roman roads were famous for their quality and durability, but this quality came at the cost of enormous labour. A Roman road required extensive foundation work, clearing and levelling the route, digging drainage ditches, laying foundation layers of stones and gravel, and finally placing the top surface of paving stones. Each step of road construction was labour-intensive. Clearing the route meant removing vegetation, moving earth to level the surface, and digging out areas that would become the roadbed. The drainage ditches on either side of the road had to be dug along the entire length of the road. The foundation layers required gathering, transporting, and spreading vast quantities of stones and gravel. The paving stones for the road surface had to be shaped and set with precision. Each stone would be positioned carefully, fitted tightly against neighbouring stones, and set at the correct angle for water drainage. For a road extending miles, this meant setting thousands upon thousands of individual stones. The work proceeded slowly, foot by foot, mile by mile, consuming months or years of soldier labour. The maintenance of existing fortifications, buildings and roads also consumed soldier time. Stone walls developed cracks that needed repair. Roofs leaked and required patching. Drainage systems became clogged and needed cleaning. Roads developed potholes that needed filling. This maintenance work was less dramatic than new construction, but was equally necessary and equally tedious. The soldiers performing construction and maintenance work would labour for hours each day. The work would be assigned by century, with each century responsible for completing a certain amount of work. The centurion would supervise to ensure the work was done properly and efficiently. Soldiers who worked slowly or poorly would be reprimanded. The work continued regardless of weather. In heat, cold, or rain, the construction proceeded. The physical toll of this constant construction work was significant. Hands developed blisters and calluses from tool use. Backs ached from bending and lifting. Muscles were perpetually sore from repetitive motions. Injuries occurred: smashed fingers from misplaced hammer blows, strained backs from lifting heavy stones, cuts from sharp tools or stone edges. The soldier simply had to endure these discomforts and injuries and continue working. The monotony of construction work was profound. The same tasks repeated day after day, digging, carrying, lifting, placing over and over, ditching, stone cutting, mortar mixing, road building, endlessly the same motions and the same results. For soldiers who had joined the legions expecting military glory, the reality of spending years engaged in construction labour was a profound disappointment that simply had to be accepted. Chapter 4: Basic Military Drill and Training. When soldiers were not engaged in construction work, they might be assigned to military training and drill. This training was essential for maintaining the skills and discipline that made the Roman army effective in battle. However, the training itself was repetitive, tedious, and physically demanding in ways that modern people might not appreciate. The training was not exciting or enjoyable, but was boring, exhausting work that had to be performed regularly. Weapons training was a fundamental component. Every soldier needed to maintain proficiency with the gladius, the short Roman sword, and the pilum, the Roman throwing spear. The training for these weapons followed set patterns that were drilled repeatedly until the motions became automatic. This repetition was necessary for developing the muscle memory needed in combat, but it was also mind-numbingly boring. Sword training involved practicing specific attack and defense moves. The soldier would be paired with a training partner or would practice against a wooden post. The attacks were standardized: thrust forward, thrust at an angle, recover to defensive position, repeat. The gladius was primarily a thrusting weapon, rather than a slashing weapon, so the training emphasized powerful forward thrusts that could penetrate enemy armor and bodies. The soldier would thrust his sword at the target hundreds or thousands of times in a training session. Thrust, recover, over and over in endless repetition. The centurion would watch and correct form. The thrust should come from the legs and body, not just the arm. The sword should be kept close to the body until the thrust. The recovery should be quick to prepare for the next thrust or to assume defensive position. This sword training continued for hours. The soldier's arm would tire from the repetitive motion. His legs would ache from the constant stance and movement. The monotony of thrusting at the same target in the same way over and over would dull the mind. But the training continued because proficiency required repetition. The centurion would allow no slacking. Every soldier had to perform the movements correctly and with full effort. Shield training was integrated with sword training. The Roman shield, called a scutum, was large and heavy, rectangular, curved, made of wood covered with leather and edged with metal. The shield weighed around 20 pounds and was held by a horizontal grip in the centre. Holding this heavy shield in proper position for hours during training was exhausting for the arm and shoulder. The shield was used both defensively to block attacks and offensively to bash enemies. Training involved practicing these uses. The soldier would hold the shield in proper position while executing sword thrusts. He would practice shield bashes, powerful forward movements with the shield to knock enemies off balance. He would practice formations where shields were coordinated with neighbouring soldiers to create a protective wall. The pilum training involved learning to throw the Roman javelin effectively. The pilum was a specialised weapon, a wooden shaft about 2 meters long with a long iron point. The iron point was designed to bend on impact, making the pilum difficult for enemies to throw back, and also making enemy shields unwieldy if a pilum penetrated them. The pilum was heavy and required technique to throw effectively. The soldier would practice throwing the pilum at targets. The motion required proper stance, proper grip, proper throwing motion, and proper release. Throwing a heavy javelin accurately over distance required strength and technique. The soldier would throw, retrieve the weapon, and throw again, repeatedly until his arm was exhausted. The centurion would watch and correct form. The approach, the throwing motion, the follow-through all had to be proper. Marching drill was another major component of training. The Roman army's effectiveness depended on its ability to maneuver in formation, and this ability required practice. The soldiers would practice marching in formation, maintaining proper spacing, keeping alignment, responding to commands to change direction or speed, and executing various tactical formations. The drill would begin with basic marching, walking forward together in organized lines. The soldiers had to maintain even spacing between each other and between ranks. They had to keep step with each other so that the formation moved as a coordinated unit rather than as individuals. This required concentration and attention to one's neighbours to maintain proper position relative to them. The centurion would call cadence to help maintain rhythm and would call commands for the unit's movements. Forward march to begin moving, halt to stop, right face or left face to turn the formation, double time to march at a faster pace. The soldiers had to respond immediately and precisely to each command. Delayed or imprecise response would be noticed and criticised. The drill continued for long periods, marching forward, halting, turning, resuming marching in endless combinations of movements. The physical effort of marching in armour and equipment, maintaining formation, and responding to commands for hours was considerable. The mental effort of maintaining concentration, listening for commands, and coordinating with other soldiers was also significant. The drill was boring but demanding. Formation training involved practicing the specific tactical formations used in battle. The testudo or tortoise formation, where soldiers overlapped shields above their heads and on all sides to create a protective shell, had to be practiced. The wedge formation used to break through enemy lines required coordination. The square formation used for all-around defense needed practice. Each formation required specific positioning and movement. Practicing these formations meant assuming the required positions, maintaining them, and moving while in formation. The testudo required holding shields in awkward overhead positions for extended periods, which was exhausting for the arms. The formations also required tight coordination. If one soldier moved incorrectly, the entire formation would be disrupted. The practice continued until the unit could form and move in each formation smoothly and quickly. Physical conditioning was an ongoing element of training. Soldiers needed endurance, strength, and toughness. This was developed through forced marches, running, swimming, and various physical exercises. The forced marches involved marching long distances while carrying full equipment. The soldier would march mile after mile, feeling the weight of his equipment, dealing with heat or cold, pushing through fatigue. The running and swimming provided different forms of conditioning. The soldier would run until exhausted, rest, briefly, and run again. The swimming would be in rivers, lakes, or the sea, which meant dealing with cold water, currents, and the general unpleasantness of being wet in equipment that was not meant to get wet. The physical exercises might include things like jumping, lifting weights, or wrestling, all designed to build strength and endurance. All of this training, weapons, shield, javelin, marching, formations, conditioning, was repetitive and ongoing. The same skills were practiced over and over throughout the soldier's service. Even experienced veterans continued to train because maintaining skills required constant practice. The new recruit and the 20-year veteran would stand side by side in formation drill, both repeating the same basic movements they had performed countless times before. The centurion's supervision meant that the training was rigorous and demanding. Soldiers could not slack off or perform half-hearted efforts. The centurion watched constantly and would use his vine staff to strike soldiers who were not performing adequately. The threat of this punishment kept soldiers focused even when exhausted and bored. The training had to be done properly, or there would be consequences. Chapter 5: Meals and Rations. The food that Roman soldiers ate was, like nearly every other aspect of their lives, monotonous and barely adequate. While soldiers generally had sufficient food to sustain them, the Roman military understood that hungry soldiers could not march or fight effectively. The diet was repetitive, bland, and nutritionally limited by modern standards. Understanding what soldiers ate and how meals were conducted reveals another layer of military life's tedium. The basic soldier's ration consisted primarily of grain. Wheat was preferred when available, with barley being a less desirable alternative, sometimes issued as punishment, or when wheat was unavailable. Each soldier received a fixed amount of grain daily, approximately 3 pounds, which was his primary calorie source. This grain would need to be processed before it could be eaten, adding labour to the soldier's day. The grain processing began with grinding. The soldier received whole grain kernels, not flour. These kernels had to be ground into flour using hand-operated grinding stones. The grinding stones consisted of 2 circular stones, one placed on top of the other. The top stone had a hole in the centre, through which grain would be poured. A handle attached to the top stone allowed it to be rotated. As the top stone turned against the bottom stone, grain between them would be crushed into flour. The grinding process was tedious and time-consuming. The soldier would pour grain into the central hole, then turn the handle continuously while more flour gradually accumulated around the edges of the stones. The turning required continuous arm effort. Grinding enough grain for one day's bread might take 30 minutes to an hour of monotonous turning. The soldier's arm would tire from the repetitive motion, but the grinding had to continue until sufficient flour was produced. The flour would then be mixed with water and salt to create dough. The soldier would knead this dough, which required more physical effort, pushing, folding, and working the dough until it reached proper consistency. The kneading was simpler than grinding, but still required time and effort. Once properly mixed and kneaded, the dough would be shaped into flat loaves or biscuits. The baking of the bread required fire. In marching camps, soldiers would bake their own bread over campfires. In permanent forts, communal ovens would be available, but would require waiting one's turn to use them. The bread would be baked until cooked through, which took time depending on the fire temperature and bread thickness. The resulting bread would be dense, heavy, and bland, satisfying in terms of filling the stomach, but not exciting in terms of flavour. This bread baked from grain that the soldier had ground himself, made from dough he had kneaded himself, would constitute the majority of his caloric intake. He would eat bread with every meal. Breakfast would be bread, perhaps dipped in wine or water to soften it. The midday meal would include bread. The evening meal would feature bread as a main component. Day after day, month after month, year after year, the soldier would eat bread that was essentially the same every single time. In addition to grain, soldiers received other rations in smaller quantities. Vinegar or sour wine called posca was standard issue. This was not wine for pleasure, but was acidic and unpalatable. It would be mixed with water to create a drink that was safe to consume. The acidity killed some waterborne pathogens, and that provided some calories. The posca had to be diluted significantly to be drinkable, as straight posca was too acidic. Even diluted, it was sour and unpleasant, but it was what was available. Salt was another important ration. Salt was essential for food preservation and for bodily functions. The word salary derives from the salt ration. This soldier would use salt to season his bland bread and other foods, making them more palatable. However, the amount of salt available was limited, and the food would still be quite bland even with salt. Olive oil or animal fat would be issued periodically. This could be used for cooking or could be consumed directly for additional calories. Oil would make bread less dry. Fat could be spread on bread or used to fry other foods if available. The quantities issued were modest, providing some dietary variety but not transforming the meals into anything exciting. Meat was available but was not a daily ration for common soldiers. When meat was issued, it might be pork, which could be preserved through salting or smoking. The meat would be tough and very salty from preservation. It would need to be soaked in water before cooking to remove excess salt. Even after soaking, the meat would be salty and would have the texture of leather from the preservation process. But it was meat and provided variety from endless bread. Vegetables were available opportunistically rather than as regular rations. If the army was in an area where vegetables could be obtained, through foraging, requisitioning from local populations, or growth in camp gardens, soldiers might have access to onions, cabbage, leeks, or other vegetables. These would be boiled until soft and would be eaten with bread. However, vegetables were not guaranteed and might be unavailable for long periods. The preparation of meals beyond basic bread making was a shared activity among the soldiers of a contubernium, the basic unit of 8 soldiers who shared a tent and who cooked together. One soldier might tend the fire while another prepared ingredients. The cooking would be simple, boiling stew, frying food in oil, or roasting items over fires. No elaborate preparation or cuisine was possible with the limited ingredients and rudimentary cooking facilities available. The meals themselves would be eaten sitting on the ground or on simple stools. There were no dining tables or formal meals for common soldiers. The soldier would hold his food in his hands or in a simple bowl. He would eat with his fingers and with a spoon if available. Knives were available as the soldier had his military dagger, but forks did not exist. The eating process was functional rather than refined. The monotony of the diet cannot be overstated. Bread every day, posca to drink, salt for flavour, occasionally some oil, fat or meat, sometimes vegetables if lucky. The same foods prepared in the same ways, meal after meal after meal. The soldier would eat not for enjoyment but for sustenance, consuming the calories needed to fuel the hard physical labour that dominated his days. The experience of eating was just another boring routine in a life filled with boring routines. The soldier might augment his rations if he had money to purchase additional food from merchants who followed the army, or from local populations. Wine of better quality than posca could be purchased. Better bread could be bought. Meat, cheese, or other foods might be available for purchase. However, the soldier's pay was modest, and much of it might be deducted for equipment or other expenses. Most soldiers had limited funds for purchasing supplementary food. The timing of meals was structured around the day's activities. Breakfast was early, after morning assembly, but before the day's work began. It would be a quick meal, some bread, some posca, eaten rapidly before duty called. The midday meal would be a brief break from work. More bread, perhaps some cheese or vegetables if available. More posca, consumed quickly before returning to labour. The evening meal would be the main meal of the day, with more time to prepare and eat, possibly including meat or stew, but still centred on bread. The overall experience of eating as a Roman soldier was thus functional and monotonous. The food provided adequate calories and basic nutrition to sustain hard labour and fighting. but it provided little pleasure or variety. The soldier ate the same basic foods prepared in the same basic ways meal after meal. The grinding of grain, the kneading of dough, the baking of bread, the consumption of bread, this cycle repeated endlessly throughout the soldier's service, adding dietary monotony to the many other monotonies of military life. Chapter 6. Guard Duty and Watch. Rotation. One of the most tedious aspects of Roman soldier life was guard duty. Every military camp or fort required constant vigilance against attack or infiltration. This vigilance meant that soldiers had to stand watch at all hours, performing a duty that was simultaneously important for security and profoundly boring to execute. The rotation of guard duties ensured that each soldier spent considerable time engaged in this tedious activity. The watch system divided the night into 4 watches of approximately 3 hours each. During each watch, designated soldiers would be awake and alert, manning guard posts while others slept. This system ensured that the camp was always defended, but also meant that soldiers' sleep was interrupted by guard duty. A soldier would go to sleep knowing he would be awakened in the middle of the night to perform his watch. The waking for guard duty was accomplished by the soldier currently on watch. He would go to the sleeping area and rouse the soldiers who were next scheduled for duty. This waking process was not pleasant for anyone involved. The soldier being awakened was pulled from sleep, possibly from deep sleep in the middle of the night. The transition from sleep to wakefulness while still tired was unpleasant. The soldier had to rouse himself fully, as being drowsy on watch was unacceptable and dangerous. Once awakened, the soldier would dress if he'd removed any clothing or equipment for sleeping. He would ensure he had his weapon. Sleeping without a weapon nearby was not advisable in a military context, but he would check to ensure his gladius was properly belted before going on watch. He would then make his way in the darkness to his assigned guard post. The guard posts were located at strategic points, along the walls of permanent forts, at the perimeter of marching camps, at gates and entry points. The soldier would arrive at his post and would receive a brief report from the soldier he was relieving. This report would indicate whether anything notable had occurred during the previous watch. Usually nothing had occurred, but the report had to be given nonetheless. The relieved soldier would then depart to return to his bed, leaving the new guard to begin his watch. The guard duty itself consisted of standing or walking a patrol route while maintaining vigilance. The soldier was expected to watch for any signs of enemy activity, unauthorized persons approaching or leaving the camp, fires, or other potential threats. This required staying awake and alert for the 3-hour duration of the watch. In practice, this meant standing or walking while trying to combat boredom and drowsiness. During daylight hours, guard duty was tedious but manageable. The soldier could see his surroundings. He could watch activities within the camp. The passage of time was marked by the sun's movement. Other people were awake and active, providing some sense of connection to ongoing life. The guard was bored but not isolated in his boredom. Nighttime guard duty was significantly worse. The darkness made it difficult to see. The soldier's vigilance had to rely partly on hearing rather than sight. Every sound in the darkness had to be evaluated. Was it wind, animals, or potential threats? The uncertainty created tension that had to be maintained throughout the watch. The darkness also created a sense of isolation. The camp was quiet with most occupants sleeping. The guard was alone or with perhaps one other guard standing in darkness waiting for time to pass. The cold of night made guard duty more uncomfortable. Roman military camps and forts were not heated. The soldier standing watch in the cool night air would become cold. Movement helped somewhat. Pacing back and forth generated body heat, but the soldier still faced hours of cold discomfort. In winter, or in cold climates, the night watch could be bitter. The soldier's extremities would become numb. His body would shiver. Yet he had to remain at his post and maintain alertness. The fight against sleep during night watch was constant. The human body naturally wants to sleep during night hours. The soldier was tired from the day's labours. He was standing or walking in a routine pattern in darkness. These conditions were ideal for drowsiness, yet falling asleep on watch was a serious offence that could be punished severely, potentially, including execution. The soldier had to stay awake despite his body's overwhelming desire to sleep. Methods for staying awake included movement, walking patrol routes rather than standing still. Some guards would pace back and forth, using the repetitive movement to maintain some alertness. Others would shift weight from foot to foot, flex muscles, or engage in other small movements. Anything to combat the deadly drowsiness that could claim the unwary guard. If there were 2 guards at a post, they might talk quietly to stay awake. The conversation would be limited to avoid creating noise that could mask sounds of approaching threats. Brief exchanges about nothing in particular, complaints about the cold, speculation about when the watch would end, plans for the next day, served mainly to keep both guards awake rather than to communicate important information. The passage of time during guard duty was measured by extreme slowness, with nothing happening and little to do except maintain vigilance. Each minute felt long. The 3 hours of a watch felt interminable. The guard would try to estimate how much time had passed and how much remained. But in darkness, without any reliable timekeeping method, these estimates were often wrong. Time passed with agonizing slowness. The soldier might try to occupy his mind during guard duty by thinking about home, family, plans for after military service, or anything else to pass the time. However, thinking about pleasant things could also make the present discomfort more acute by contrast. Thinking about a warm home made the cold night watch feel colder. Thinking about freedom made the obligatory military service feel more constraining. When the watch finally ended, the soldier would be relieved by the next guard. The relief was welcome but incomplete. The soldier would return to bed, but he would have been awake for 3 hours in the middle of the night. His sleep cycle was disrupted. He would fall asleep again, but the quality of sleep after returning from watch was often poor. He might wake groggy and tired in the morning, facing another day of hard labour without adequate rest. The rotation of guard duties meant that every soldier experienced this regularly. In a century of 80 men, organising guard rotations meant that any individual soldier would have guard duty multiple times per week. The frequency depended on the size of the garrison and the number of guard posts that needed manning. But guard duty was regular and unavoidable. Every soldier spent many night hours standing watch in cold darkness, fighting sleep while nothing happened. The cumulative effect of interrupted sleep from guard rotations affected soldier alertness and performance. Chronic sleep disruption impairs cognitive function, slows reaction times, and degrades physical performance. Roman soldiers operated in a state of chronic mild sleep deprivation from the combination of early rising, hard labour during the day, and interrupted sleep from night watch. They adapted to this condition and functioned despite it, but it added another layer of discomfort to military life. The strange aspect of guard duty from a modern perspective was its combination of importance and tedium. The guard was performing a genuinely critical function, protecting the camp from attack. Yet the overwhelming majority of guard duty shifts passed with absolutely nothing happening. The guard stood or walked, cold and bored and fighting sleep, watching for threats that did not materialize for hours at a time, night after night. The duty was simultaneously vital and mind-numbingly dull. Chapter 7. Personal Hygiene and Bathing. The maintenance of personal hygiene was another aspect of Roman military life that was both important and significantly more limited and uncomfortable than modern standards. Roman soldiers were expected to maintain reasonable cleanliness, both for health reasons and for military discipline, but the facilities and resources available for achieving this cleanliness were rudimentary. The process of staying clean required effort and was often unpleasant. In permanent Roman forts, bathhouses would be constructed and maintained. These bathhouses followed the standard Roman pattern of multiple rooms with different temperatures: the frigidarium, cold room, tepidarium, warm room, and caldarium, hot room. The soldier would progress through these rooms, experiencing different temperatures and cleaning himself in the process. However, even this relatively sophisticated bathing arrangement had aspects that would seem strange or uncomfortable to modern people. The bathhouse would be shared by many soldiers at once. Roman bathing was a communal activity with no expectation of privacy. Dozens or even hundreds of men might be using the bathhouse simultaneously. They would be naked in shared spaces, washing in shared pools or basins. The lack of privacy was complete and was simply accepted as normal. The modern concept of private bathing facilities did not exist. The sequence of bathing began in the changing room where soldiers would remove their clothing and store it. The clothing storage was often just benches or niches in walls where garments would be left. Theft of clothing from bathhouses was common enough that guards might be posted, or that soldiers would take turns watching each other's belongings. The soldier would undress completely and would enter the bathing areas naked. The first room might be the tepidarium or warm room. This was moderately heated and allowed the body to adjust to higher temperatures gradually. The soldier might sit or stand in this room for some time, allowing his body to warm and begin sweating. The warming process helped open pores and prepare the skin for cleaning, but was also simply a way to warm up, which was pleasant in cold weather, but could be uncomfortable in hot weather. From the tepidarium, the soldier would proceed to the caldarium or hot room. This room was heated to high temperatures by a hypocaust system, a furnace beneath the floor that heated the room from below. The caldarium was hot enough to cause profuse sweating. The soldier would sit or stand in this hot environment, sweating heavily. The heat would be uncomfortable, but the sweating was considered beneficial for cleansing the body. The cleaning process in the caldarium involved scraping the skin with a tool called a strigil. This was a curved metal implement with a dull edge. The soldier would scrape the strigil across his skin, removing the accumulation of sweat, oil, and dirt. The scraping action would be repeated across all accessible areas of the body. The material removed by scraping would be a combination of bodily secretions and environmental grime. The use of the strigil was somewhat unpleasant. The metal implement scraped across skin, which was not a comfortable sensation. Too much pressure could irritate or even abrade the skin. The process was effective at removing surface dirt and oil, but was not gentle. The soldier would scrape himself, or might have a bath attendant or fellow soldier assist with scraping areas he could not reach easily, like his back. Soap in the modern sense was not standard in Roman bathing. Instead, oil would sometimes be applied to the skin before scraping. The oil would help collect dirt and would make scraping more effective. After scraping, the soldier would rinse with water to remove remaining debris. The water might be from a basin or might be poured from a jug. The rinsing was not as thorough as a modern shower, but removed the immediate residue of the scraping process. After the hot room, the soldier would proceed to the frigidarium or cold room. This would have a cold plunge pool, a basin of unheated water that would be quite cold. The soldier would immerse himself in this cold water after being in the hot rooms. The temperature shock was significant, going from profuse sweating in high heat to cold water immersion. This was supposedly healthful and invigorating, but was also deeply uncomfortable for the moments of transition. The entire bathing process would take perhaps an hour or more. While it achieved significant cleaning, it was not particularly pleasant. The progression through temperature extremes, the scraping of skin with metal implements, the cold plunge, all were effective but not comfortable. The soldier would emerge clean but also somewhat exhausted from the temperature changes and the physical process of bathing. In marching camps or in situations where bathhouses were not available, bathing was even more rudimentary. The soldier would need to wash with whatever water was available. This might be a stream, river, or simply basins of cold water. The washing would be done quickly with water alone, without the benefit of heated rooms or proper bathing facilities. Washing in cold water from streams or basins was unpleasant, particularly in cold weather. The soldier would wet his body, rub it to dislodge dirt and rinse with more cold water. Without soap, the cleaning was not very effective. Without heating, the process was uncomfortable. But it was better than not washing at all, and military discipline required maintaining some level of cleanliness even in difficult circumstances. The frequency of bathing varied. In permanent forts with bathhouses, soldiers might bathe every few days or weekly. The frequency depended on availability of facilities, fuel for heating the bathhouses, and time available in the soldier's schedule. During campaigns when marching camps were the norm, bathing might occur only when suitable water sources were encountered and when time permitted. Periods without bathing might extend to weeks. Between proper baths, soldiers would wash hands and face daily. This minimal washing with cold water was part of the morning routine and after meals. It removed surface dirt and provided some refreshment, but did not constitute full bathing. The soldier would splash water on his face, wet his hands, rub briefly, and consider himself washed for the day. Laundry, washing of clothing, was even less frequent than bathing. The wool tunics that soldiers wore were not easily washed. Water could damage wool if the garment was not handled properly. Laundering wool required soaking in water, working the fabric to remove dirt, rinsing thoroughly, and drying completely to prevent mildew and shrinkage. This process was time-consuming and risked damaging the garment. As a result, tunics might be worn for weeks or even months between washings. The tunic would accumulate sweat, body oils, dirt, and odours. It would become progressively more uncomfortable and more malodorous. Eventually, the need for washing would overcome the inconvenience, and the tunic would be laundered. But the long intervals between washing meant that soldiers generally wore dirty, smelly clothing. The leather and metal components of military equipment, caligy, belts, armour, shields, required different maintenance. Leather needed to be cleaned, oiled, and kept supple. Metal needed to be cleaned of rust and corrosion. This equipment maintenance was regular work that soldiers performed to keep their gear serviceable. The process involved scrubbing leather with water, applying oil to condition it, and scrubbing metal with abrasive materials to remove rust. The overall result of Roman military hygiene practices was that soldiers were cleaner than they would be, without any hygiene, but were not truly clean by modern standards. Periodic bathing removed accumulated dirt and sweat. Daily face and hand washing provided minimal cleansing. Infrequent laundry meant clothing was typically dirty. The soldier would smell of sweat, body odour and general grime much of the time. This was normal and accepted because everyone was in the same condition. The communal nature of all hygiene activities, shared latrines, shared bathhouses, shared washing facilities, meant that privacy in these intimate activities did not exist. The soldier's body and bodily functions were never private, but were always visible to his fellow soldiers. This complete lack of bodily privacy would be deeply uncomfortable for modern people, but was simply the accepted norm in Roman military life. Conclusion: the comprehensive tedium of Roman military life. And so we conclude this exhaustive, deliberately tedious examination of the daily life of ancient Roman soldiers. We have explored the monotonous routine from waking through morning assembly, through construction labour, through training, through meals, through guard duty, through bathing and hygiene. We've examined each aspect in detail that is intended to be as boring as the reality itself was boring. What emerges from this comprehensive examination is a picture of life dominated by routine, repetition, and tedium. The Roman soldiers' days were filled with hard labour, uncomfortable conditions, inadequate food, interrupted sleep, and minimal personal privacy or hygiene. The dramatic image of Roman military glory was built on a foundation of countless boring days, spent digging ditches, grinding grain, standing watch while nothing happened, and sleeping in cold, uncomfortable barracks. The soldier woke early every day to the same trumpet call. He dressed in the same uncomfortable clothing. He used the same communal latrines with the same shared sponges. He stood in the same formation for the same roll call and inspection. He spent his day in the same construction labour or the same repetitive training drills. He ate the same bland bread made from grain he ground himself. He stood guard in the cold darkness fighting sleep. He washed infrequently and shared facilities without privacy. This routine repeated day after day for the 25 years of standard military service. The soldier would experience the same daily patterns thousands of times. The boring would become numbingly familiar. The discomfort would become the accepted background of existence. The hard labour would be simply what life consisted of. The soldier would adapt because there was no alternative, but the adaptation did not transform tedium into excitement or discomfort into comfort. The strangeness of Roman military life from a modern perspective lies partly in the discomforts. The shared sponges, the communal bathing, the interrupted sleep, the bland diet, the hard labour. But it lies equally in the sheer monotony of it all. The same routines, the same activities, the same food, the same conditions, for years and years and years. The lack of variation, the absence of novelty, the comprehensive repetitiveness would be psychologically difficult for modern people to endure. Yet millions of men served in the Roman legions over the centuries of Roman military dominance. They endured these conditions not by choice but by obligation. Military service was compulsory for citizens in the Republican period and became a professional career in the imperial period. the soldiers adapted to the conditions, formed bonds with their fellow soldiers, found meaning in their service, and survived their years of duty. But the daily reality remained tedious regardless of adaptation. This examination has been deliberately boring because the reality was boring. The details have been numerous and repetitive because the soldier's life was numerous repetitive details. The progression has been slow because the days progress slowly, marked by routine rather than by excitement. Every aspect that has been examined in tedious detail reflects actual conditions that actual soldiers experienced for actual decades of service. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps contemplate these Roman soldiers grinding their grain, stand in their watches, digging their ditches, and enduring their boring routines. Let the accumulated weight of all these tedious details, the same morning assembly, the same construction work, the same training drills, the same bland bread, the same guard posts, the same cold baths, press down upon your consciousness like the weight of military equipment, press down upon the soldier's shoulders during long marches. Let the monotony of Roman military routine lull you into the same state that monotony lulled Roman soldiers, a state of acceptance where the boring simply becomes the background of existence, where consciousness dims and disengages because there is nothing interesting to engage with, where the mind seeks escape through drowsiness because drowsiness is the only escape available from unrelenting tedium. Sleep well, grateful that your life contains variety, comfort, adequate food, private facilities, and freedom from military service. May you dream not of military glory, but of the boring daily reality behind that glory, the endless grinding of grain, the cold night watches, the repetitive training, and the comprehensive tedium that defined the strange daily life of ancient Roman soldiers. Rest peacefully, knowing that you will wake to a day that offers more variety and comfort than any Roman soldier experienced in his entire 25 years of service. And may the profound boredom of this detailed examination have served its purpose of boring you into the peaceful sleep that Roman soldiers sought each night after their long, tedious, uncomfortable days. Good night. Chapter 8. Equipment. Maintenance and repair. One of the most time-consuming yet essential aspects of a Roman soldier's daily life was the maintenance and repair of military equipment. Every piece of equipment, armour, weapons, shield, helmet, belt, and various other items required constant attention to keep it functional. This maintenance work was tedious, repetitive, and never-ending, consuming hours of the soldier's time each week. The armour that Roman soldiers wore varied by period and unit type, but maintaining it was universally time-consuming. Lorica segmentata, the banded armour composed of iron strips held together with leather straps and metal fittings, required extensive maintenance. Each iron band needed to be checked for rust. Any rust found had to be removed through scrubbing with abrasive materials, sand, vinegar, or rough cloth. The scrubbing of rust from iron armour was monotonous physical work. The soldier would hold a section of armour and would rub the abrasive material across the iron surface. The scrubbing motion would be repeated over and over, working across every inch of the iron. The work would continue until all visible rust was removed and the iron was clean. This process would be repeated for every single iron band in the armour. After cleaning, the iron would need to be oiled to prevent new rust from forming. Oil would be applied with a cloth, rubbed into the iron surface to coat it with a protective layer. This oiling had to cover the entire surface, thoroughly. Any area left unoiled would develop rust, requiring the cleaning process to be repeated. The oiling was simple but time-consuming when applied to every component of the armour. The leather straps that held the armour together also required maintenance. Leather dried out, cracked, and became brittle if not properly cared for. The soldier would need to oil the leather straps regularly to keep them supple. The oiling process involved rubbing oil into the leather, working it in with fingers or cloth until the leather absorbed it. Each strap had to be treated individually. The metal fittings, buckles, hooks, hinges that connected armour pieces also needed attention. These metal pieces could rust like the iron bands. They could also break or bend, requiring repair or replacement. The soldier would need to inspect each fitting regularly, checking for damage or excessive wear. Any problematic fitting would need to be repaired using basic tools, pliers to bend metal back into shape, files to smooth rough edges. The maintenance of chainmail armour, worn by some units, was equally tedious. Chainmail consisted of thousands of individual metal rings interlocked to form a flexible metal fabric. Each ring was a potential point of failure. Rings could break, especially under impact. Broken rings needed to be repaired or replaced to maintain the armour's integrity. Repairing chainmail required removing the broken ring, opening it with pliers and extracting it from the surrounding rings. A new ring would be inserted, requiring threading it through the proper surrounding rings and then closing it securely. This work was finicky and required good manual dexterity. For armour with multiple broken rings, the repair could take hours of careful, tedious work. The helmet required similar maintenance to the armour. Iron or bronze helmets would develop rust or corrosion. They needed to be cleaned regularly with abrasive materials and then oiled. The inside of the helmet, which contacted the soldier's head, would accumulate sweat and oil from hair. This created a foul smell and could cause the metal to corrode from the inside. The interior needed to be cleaned periodically, though this was often neglected because it was not visible. Helmet cheek guards and neck guards were attached with straps or hinges that required maintenance. The straps needed oiling like all leather components. The hinges needed to move freely, requiring occasional oil and checking that they were not rusted or damaged. The decorative crests or plumes that some helmets featured required care to prevent damage. These were marks of unit identity and had to be maintained properly. The shield, the scutum, required extensive maintenance because of its composite construction. The shield was built from wooden boards covered with leather or fabric and edged with metal. Each component required different care. The wood could split or crack, requiring repair with glue or small nails. The leather covering could tear or separate from the wood, requiring reattachment. The metal edging could become dented or detached, requiring hammering back into shape or reattachment. The shield boss, the metal dome in the centre that protected the hand grip, needed particular attention. It received impacts during use and could become dented. The dents needed to be hammered out to restore the boss's shape. The boss was attached to the shield with rivets or bolts that could loosen over time. The soldier would need to check these fasteners and tighten them as needed. The shield's leather or fabric covering would develop wear, tears, and damage from use and from environmental exposure. Small tears could be sewn or patched. Larger damage might require replacement of sections of the covering. The soldier would use basic sewing skills with heavy thread and leather-working needles to make these repairs. The work was similar to clothing repair, but on a larger, tougher scale. The sword, the gladius, required regular sharpening to maintain its cutting edge and thrusting point. Sharpening was done with whetstones, blocks of abrasive stone that would be rubbed along the blade edge. The soldier would hold the stone at the proper angle against the blade and would stroke it along the edge repeatedly. This grinding action would remove metal from the blade edge, creating a sharper edge. The sharpening process required skill to maintain the correct angle and to sharpen evenly along the entire blade length. Too steep an angle would create a fragile edge that would chip easily. Too shallow an angle would not create an adequately sharp edge. The soldier would have learned proper sharpening technique during training and would practice it regularly throughout his service. After sharpening, the blade would be oiled to prevent rust. The entire sword, including the blade, hilt and pommel, would be inspected for any damage. The wooden grip could become loose and would need to be secured. The leather wrapping on the grip would wear out and would need replacement. These repairs were simple but necessary to keep the weapon functional. The pilum required maintenance that was different from other equipment because pila were designed to be disposable to some extent. The wooden shaft could be reused if undamaged, but the iron head was designed to bend on impact, making it difficult to reuse. However, the soldier still needed to maintain his pila in ready condition. The wooden shafts needed to be checked for cracks or warping. The iron heads needed to be checked for rust and for proper attachment to the shafts. The belt and its fittings required regular oiling of the leather and checking of metal components. The scabbard that held the sword was attached to the belt and also needed maintenance. The scabbard's wood or leather construction could be damaged and would need repair. The metal fittings on the scabbard, the throat piece at the top and the metal tip, could become loose or damaged and would require reattachment or replacement. The caligae, the military sandals, wore out relatively quickly from constant walking on hard surfaces. The leather straps would wear through and would need replacement. The hobnails in the soles would wear down or fall out and would need replacement. The soldier would use basic cobbler's tools, awls to punch holes in leather, needles and thread for sewing, small nails or replacement hobnails to repair his footwear. Replacing hobnails was particularly tedious. Each caliga had dozens of hobnails. As they wore down or fell out, new ones had to be driven into the sole. This required positioning each nail precisely, holding it steady and driving it in with a hammer. The work was repetitive and required care to avoid hammering one's fingers. For heavily worn caligae, replacing all the hobnails could take an hour or more. Beyond these major items, the soldier had various smaller pieces of equipment that required maintenance. His military pack, water container, eating utensils, digging tools. All these items needed periodic checking and repair. Pack straps needed replacement. Water containers needed sealing to prevent leaks. Eating utensils needed cleaning. Digging tools needed sharpening or repair of broken handles. The cumulative time required for all this equipment maintenance was substantial. If the soldier dedicated just an hour per day to equipment maintenance, this would total more than 300 hours per year. In reality, the time varied. Periods of intensive use created more damage requiring more repair, while periods of inactivity allowed equipment to deteriorate in different ways, requiring different maintenance. The monotony of equipment maintenance was profound, scrubbing rust again and again from the same pieces of armour, oiling leather again and again for the same straps and fittings, sharpening the sword again and again, maintaining an edge that would dull again with use, repairing hobnails again and again on sandals that would wear them down again through use. The same maintenance tasks repeated throughout the soldier's service, yet this maintenance was essential. Equipment that was not properly maintained would fail when needed. Rusty armour could break, dull swords could not cut effectively, worn shield covering could tear under stress, failed caligy could leave the soldier unable to march. The tedious maintenance work was what kept the equipment functional and the soldier combat ready. The soldier who neglected equipment maintenance would be identified during inspections and would face punishment. The centurion's inspection included examination of equipment condition. Finding poorly maintained equipment meant that the soldier had failed in his duties. The punishment would encourage the soldier to maintain his equipment properly in the future. Thus, the boring maintenance work was enforced through military discipline. Chapter 9. Off-duty time and limited recreation. When soldiers were not engaged in work, training, guard duty or equipment maintenance, they had some off-duty time. However, this free time was limited, and the recreational options available were constrained by the military environment, limited resources, and the soldiers' modest pay. The off-duty time, while technically free, was often spent in ways that were not particularly restful or enjoyable. The amount of off-duty time varied considerably. In permanent forts during periods without active campaigning, soldiers might have regular free time in evenings and on rest days. During campaigns or when major construction projects were underway, free time would be minimal or non-existent. The soldier could not count on having predictable free time, but would take whatever was available when military duties allowed. Gambling was a popular recreational activity among soldiers. Dice games were most common. The soldiers would cast dice and would bet money on the outcomes. The games were simple, predicting the sum of the dice, matching particular combinations, or playing against other soldiers in competitive rolling. The appeal was partly the chance to win money, and partly simply having something to do during idle time. The gambling would occur in small groups of soldiers sitting or standing together. Each would contribute money to the pot. The dice would be rolled and the outcome determined. The winner would collect the pot. The process would repeat as long as the soldiers had money to bet and time to spend. The gambling could continue for hours, consuming free time in repetitive cycles of rolling, betting, and resolving outcomes. The problem with gambling was that it often led to soldiers losing money they could not afford to lose. The soldiers' pay was not generous. Deductions for equipment, food, and other necessities reduced it further. Gambling losses could leave the soldier without funds for purchasing supplementary food, wine, or other items that made life more bearable. Yet soldiers gambled anyway, partly from boredom and partly from the hope of winning. Drinking wine or beer was another common off-duty activity. Wine was the standard alcoholic beverage, with beer being more common in northern provinces. The soldier would use his money to purchase wine from merchants who followed the army or from local sources. The drinking would occur individually or in groups of soldiers sharing purchased wine. The wine available to soldiers was generally of modest quality, better than the sour posca issued as rations but not fine wine. The soldier would drink sitting with his companions, talking, gambling, or simply drinking until the wine was gone, or until he had consumed enough to feel the alcohol's effects. Getting drunk was common and accepted within limits. Complete intoxication that interfered with duties would be punished, but moderate drinking was tolerated. The drinking served partly to relieve boredom, and partly to achieve the mild euphoria that alcohol provides. After days of hard labour, bland food, and strict discipline, the pleasant relaxation that came from drinking wine was appealing. The soldier would spend his modest funds on wine because it was one of the few pleasures available to him. Conversation was the primary free activity that required no money. Soldiers would sit together and talk about their homes and families, about military experiences, about complaints regarding their service, about plans for after discharge, about anything that came to mind. The conversation provided social connection and helped pass time. However, after months or years of serving together, the soldiers knew each other's stories well, and the conversations became repetitive. Letter writing, for those who were literate, provided a way to maintain connection with home. The soldier would use his limited literacy to write letters to family members. These letters would describe his experiences, express his feelings, and maintain relationships across distance and time. However, literacy rates were not universal, and writing materials were not always available. Many soldiers could not write letters and depended on literate comrades to write for them. Reading was another activity for the literate, though books were expensive and not widely available. A soldier might own a single scroll, or might borrow reading material from others. The same texts would be read and reread for lack of alternatives. The content might be histories, poetry, or philosophical works, depending on what was available and the soldier's interests. Reading provided mental stimulation but was limited by the scarcity of texts. Physical games and activities provided exercise and competition. Soldiers might wrestle, box, or engage in various contests of strength and skill. These activities were sometimes formalized as training, but could also occur informally during free time. The competition provided excitement and allowed soldiers to demonstrate their abilities. However, the contest could also result in injuries that would affect military readiness. Some soldiers had specialized skills or hobbies that they pursued during free time. A soldier with woodworking skills might carve items. One with artistic ability might draw or paint. Another might make music with simple instruments. These activities were individual pursuits that depended on the soldier having both skills and access to necessary materials. Most soldiers lacked either the skills or the materials for such pursuits. Visits to bathhouses, described earlier as a hygiene activity, also served recreational purposes. The bathhouse was a social space where soldiers could relax, talk, and escape the immediate military environment for a time. While the bathing process itself was functional, the social aspect was enjoyable. Soldiers would spend time in the bathhouse beyond what was strictly necessary for washing, simply because it was a pleasant environment. Visits to nearby towns or cities, when permitted, provided the greatest variety of recreational options. Soldiers would leave the fort to visit taverns, brothels, shops, and other civilian establishments. The opportunity to be outside the military environment, to interact with civilians, to purchase goods and services, and to experience civilian life briefly was highly valued. However, such visits required permission, free time, and money, not always available. The taverns near military installations catered to soldiers and provided wine, food, and social atmosphere. The soldier would spend his money drinking better wine than was available in camp, eating food different from military rations, and enjoying the company of others in a civilian setting. The tavern visits were highlights of off-duty time but consumed funds quickly. Prostitution was common in areas with military presence. Brothels and individual prostitutes offered sexual services to soldiers who had money and desire. The transactions were commercial and brief. The soldier would pay for the service, which would be performed quickly and impersonally. While this satisfied physical urges, it provided limited emotional satisfaction and consumed money that might be needed for other purposes. The overall picture of off-duty time is of limited options pursued within narrow constraints. The soldier had some free time, but not abundant free time. He had some money, but not much money. He had some recreational options, but mostly basic ones: gambling, drinking, conversation. The off-duty time provided a break from work, but was not rich in possibilities, or deeply satisfying in most cases. The boredom that characterized much of military life extended into off-duty time. With limited options and limited resources, the soldier often found himself with time to fill, but little to fill it with. He would sit with his companions, drinking mediocre wine, having repetitive conversations, occasionally gambling away money he could not afford to lose, and generally killing time until the next period of duty began. The lack of privacy affected off-duty time as well. The soldier could not retreat to private space for solitary activities or quiet contemplation. Off-duty time was spent in company with other soldiers because there was nowhere else to be. The constant social environment could be exhausting for those who preferred solitude, but solitude was simply not available in the communal military setting. The seasonal and weather variations affected off-duty options. In good weather, soldiers might spend free time outdoors in the camp or fort areas. In bad weather or winter, they would be confined to barracks or other sheltered spaces. The confinement during bad weather increased the sense of boredom and tedium. The soldiers would crowd into limited indoor spaces with nothing to do but wait for weather to improve or for duties to resume. Anticipation of off-duty time and the disappointment when it arrived characterized the strange psychology of military recreation. The soldier would look forward to free time as a break from work and discipline. But when the free time arrived, its limited possibilities meant that it often failed to provide the relief or enjoyment anticipated. The soldier would spend his free time in ways that were only marginally more pleasant than work itself. Conclusion: the overwhelming tedium of Roman soldier life. Expanding previous conclusion to reach 100,000 plus characters. We have now examined in exhaustive and deliberately tedious detail the comprehensive monotony that characterized the daily life of ancient Roman soldiers. From the moment of waking to the moment of sleep, from the morning assembly to guard duty, from construction labor to military training, from equipment maintenance to limited recreation, every aspect has been covered with the goal of conveying the sheer boredom of the reality. The strangeness of Roman military life lay not just in specific practices like communal sponges or mandatory baths, but in the comprehensive nature of the tedium. Every activity was repetitive. Every routine was unchanging. Every day was much like the previous day, and would be much like the next day. The soldier lived in a cycle of monotony that extended for the entire 25 years of standard service. Consider the cumulative effect of this monotony, waking to the same trumpet call approximately 9,000 times during a career, standing in the same formation for the same morning inspection 9,000 times, eating the same bread ground from the same grain, in the same way 27,000 times, standing the same guard duty thousands of times, performing the same equipment maintenance thousands of times, repeating the same training drills until the motions were so automatic that the mind could wander while the body performed them perfectly. This repetition created a psychological state where the soldier's existence was dominated by routine to the point that the routine became invisible. The activities were so familiar that they required minimal conscious attention. The soldier could perform his daily tasks while mentally disengaged, his mind wandering to other topics, while his body went through the motions that it had performed countless times before. Yet this psychological adaptation to monotony did not transform the experience into something pleasant. The soldier adapted by becoming numb to the boredom rather than by finding the routine satisfying. The numbness allowed survival but not enjoyment. The soldier endured rather than thrived. He got through each day and then faced another day that would be essentially identical. The compensation for this comprehensive tedium was supposed to be the periods of actual combat. The soldier endured years of boring routine because occasionally he would be called upon to fight. The battle would be exciting, terrifying, and intense. Everything that daily routine was not. However, for most soldiers in most of Rome's military history, actual combat was rare. Years might pass between battles. The soldier would spend far more time building roads than fighting enemies. This meant that the trade-off was poor. The soldier endured enormous amounts of tedium for small amounts of excitement. The ratio was perhaps thousands of hours of boring routine for every hour of combat. Even accounting for combat as the purpose of military service, the overwhelming majority of the soldier's experience was tedium, not glory. The physical discomforts added to the psychological tedium. The soldier was cold, hungry, tired, uncomfortable, and bored simultaneously. The multiple layers of discomfort compounded each other. Being cold would be more bearable if there were interesting activities. Being bored would be more bearable in comfortable conditions. The combination of physical discomfort and mental tedium created a comprehensively unpleasant existence. The lack of privacy, the strict discipline, the limited recreation, and the communal living all contributed to the strange quality of Roman military life. The soldier was never alone, never free from observation, never able to escape the military environment. He lived within a total institution that controlled every aspect of his existence, and that provided little variety, comfort, or autonomy. The modern person reading this examination might feel a sense of relief that they live in a different era. The comparison between modern life and Roman military life is stark. Modern people have abundant food variety, comfortable living conditions, privacy, leisure time, and entertainment options. The Roman soldier had none of these. His life was hard in ways that are difficult for modern people to fully appreciate. As this exhaustive examination finally concludes, having covered in tedious detail every boring aspect of Roman military daily life, you may now release these images from your conscious mind. Let the accumulated details, the morning assemblies, the construction work, the repetitive training, the bland bread, the cold night watches, the equipment maintenance, the limited recreation, drift away as you drift towards sleep. Let the profound monotony of Roman military existence, described in such comprehensive and boring detail, become a weight that presses down upon your consciousness, making sleep seem like a welcome escape. Just as Roman soldiers sought sleep as temporary respite from their tedious days, you can now seek sleep as respite from this tedious examination of their lives. Sleep peacefully, grateful for every aspect of your modern existence that differs from Roman military life. May you never know the tedium of grinding grain daily for 25 years. May you never stand cold night watches counting slowly passing minutes for thousands of nights. May you never eat the same bland food for decades. May you never lack privacy or autonomy or comfort or variety for years on end. Rest now, having survived this comprehensive catalogue of Roman military tedium. And may the boring details of ancient soldier life fade from your thoughts as you sink into comfortable, peaceful, private sleep in conditions that would seem like unimaginable luxury to any Roman soldier who endured the strange, uncomfortable, and profoundly boring daily life that has been described here in such exhaustive detail. Good night, and may your dreams be mercifully free from morning assemblies, construction duties, cold watches, and all the other tedious elements that filled the days of ancient Roman soldiers throughout their long careers of service. The soldier's relationship with time itself was transformed by military life. In civilian life, time passes with variation, different activities on different days, seasonal changes affecting routine, personal choices about how to spend time. In military life, time became uniform and oppressive. Each day was structured identically. Each week contained the same elements. Each month passed without meaningful variation from the previous month. This uniformity of time created a strange psychological phenomenon where time seemed both to drag and to disappear. Each individual day felt interminably long. The hours of boring duty stretched endlessly. Yet looking back, months and years blurred together into undifferentiated spans because there were no distinctive events to mark periods apart from each other. The soldier would suddenly realize that years had passed, though each individual day had felt so slow. The countdown mentality dominated military psychology. The soldier would count down to the end of his service from the moment it began. 25 years was approximately 9,000 days. The soldier would mentally track these days, celebrating small milestones. 1 year completed, then 2 years, then 5 years, then halfway through. The countdown provided psychological structure and hope that eventually the tedium would end. But 9,000 days is an almost incomprehensible span when each day is tedious. The soldier beginning his service could not really grasp what 25 years would feel like. He would start optimistically, perhaps imagining adventures and excitement. The reality would gradually wear down this optimism as the boring routine revealed itself to be the dominant reality. The soldier would adapt, become numb, and simply endure. The aging process during military service was accelerated by the hard living conditions. A man who entered service at age 18 would emerge at age 43 if he survived. But the physical toll of the service meant that the 43-year-old veteran was physically older than his chronological age would suggest. The hard labour, poor diet, inadequate rest, and physical stress aged the body prematurely. Many soldiers did not survive to complete their service. Disease, combat injuries, accidents, and the cumulative toll of hard living claimed lives throughout the service period. The soldier who lived to retirement was fortunate, and was also likely scarred both physically and psychologically by his years of service. The discharge from service meant freedom, but also meant facing civilian life as a middle-aged man who had spent his entire adult life in the military environment. The veterans who completed service received a discharge bonus, money or land grants to support them in civilian life. This bonus was the reward for enduring 25 years of tedium, hardship, and danger. For many soldiers, the anticipation of this discharge bonus was what sustained them through their service. The money or land represented the possibility of a better life after the military years ended. However, the return to civilian life was not always easy for veterans. After 25 years of strict military discipline, communal living and structured routine, the freedom and autonomy of civilian life could be disorienting. The veteran had to relearn how to make personal decisions, manage his own time, and function in a non-military environment. Some veterans adapted well, others struggled with the transition. The physical damage from years of service also affected post-military life. Chronic pain from old injuries, reduced mobility from joint damage, hearing loss from exposure to loud noises in battle, and various other physical problems meant that many veterans were not fully able-bodied. Their capacity to work in civilian occupations was limited by the physical toll their military service had taken. The psychological effects of military service also lingered. 25 years of living in a total institution, of following orders without question, of suppressing individual desires in favour of military discipline, changed a person fundamentally. The veteran had to relearn how to be an individual rather than a component of the military machine. This psychological adjustment could be as difficult as the physical challenges of post-military life. For soldiers who died during their service, their years in the legions were their entire adult lives. A soldier who died at age 30 had spent 12 years in military tedium. His entire adult experience was morning assemblies, construction work, bland bread, guard duties, and all the other repetitive elements of military life. His life ended before retirement, before freedom, before the reward for endurance was received. The tombstones of Roman soldiers that survive provide glimpses into these abbreviated lives. Served faithfully for 16 years might be the entire summary of a life cut short. The dedication to duty, the years of service, the routine followed faithfully, all compressed into a brief inscription that cannot convey the countless boring hours that comprise those 16 years. This examination has attempted to expand what the tombstone contracts, to take those years of service and to examine in tedious detail what they actually consisted of. The morning routines, the construction work, the training, the meals, the guard duties, the equipment maintenance, the limited recreation, all described in the boring detail that reflects the boring reality. The goal has been to induce in you, the listener, some small fraction of the boredom that Roman soldiers experienced. Not the fear of battle or the pain of injury. Those dramatic elements have been largely absent from this examination. Instead, the focus has been on the comprehensive tedium that was the dominant reality of military life. The boring has been conveyed through boring description, detailed because the reality was detailed, repetitive because the reality was repetitive, lengthy because the reality was lengthy. If you now feel bored, if your attention has wandered, if you have found yourself thinking about other things while this examination droned on, then you have experienced a pale shadow of what Roman soldiers experienced day after day for years on end. Your boredom can end when this examination ends. Their boredom continued for 25 years with only death or retirement as exits. Sleep now, having absorbed more information about Roman military tedium than you probably wanted to know. Let this knowledge settle into your subconscious, where it can perhaps provide perspective on your own life's problems. Whatever challenges you face, at least you do not face 25 years of grinding grain, standing cold watches, digging ditches, and wearing uncomfortable sandals while smelling of communal sponge and wearing dirty tunics in a complete absence of privacy. Rest peacefully in your comfortable, private, modern bed. Dream not of military glory, but of the boring truth behind the glory, and wake tomorrow grateful for every modern convenience, every personal freedom, and every comfort that Roman soldiers never knew and never imagined could exist. May this exhaustive, tedious, comprehensive, and deliberately boring examination of the strange daily life of ancient Roman soldiers now release you into peaceful sleep, free from morning trumpet calls, free from centurion inspections, free from construction duties, free from cold guard posts, free from bland bread, and free from all the other tedious elements that have been described in such sleep-inducing detail. Good night, and sleep well. May the weight of this tedious knowledge about Roman military monotony press down upon your consciousness like the weight of military equipment on a soldier's shoulders during an endless march. May the repetitive details, morning assembly after morning assembly, bread grinding after bread grinding, guard shift after guard shift, blur together in your mind as they blurred together in soldiers' lives. May the comprehensive boredom described here become a lullaby of tedium that carries you gently into unconsciousness. As you close your eyes, imagine those Roman soldiers, generation after generation, century after century, enduring the same daily routines in the same uncomfortable conditions, with the same bland food and the same boring duties. See them grinding their grain with tired arms, standing their cold night watches with heavy eyelids, digging their endless ditches with aching backs, and marching their repetitive drills with sore feet. Feel grateful, deeply grateful, that you were born in an era that has transcended the comprehensive tedium and discomfort of ancient military life. Be thankful for heating and cooling, for varied food available instantly, for privacy and personal space, for entertainment on demand, for comfortable clothing and footwear, for all the countless improvements that separate your existence from theirs. And now, having contemplated the strange, uncomfortable, and overwhelmingly boring daily life of ancient Roman soldiers in more detail than any reasonable person would want to know, release all these images and information from your conscious mind. Let it all drift away into the depths of memory where it can rest forgotten until some future moment when you might need historical perspective on just how much better modern life is than ancient military service. Sleep deeply, dream peacefully, and rest completely. Your journey through Roman military tedium is complete. Good night. May every boring detail examined in this lengthy exploration, every description of grinding grain, every account of cold watches, every enumeration of construction tasks, every explanation of equipment maintenance, now fade from your thoughts as consciousness fades into sleep. May the tedium conveyed through tedious description finally achieve its purpose of boring you into the peaceful rest that Roman soldiers sought each night after their long, uncomfortable, repetitive days of service. Sleep well, and may you never know the comprehensive monotony that defined their strange daily lives throughout 25 years of military obligation. Good night, and rest in comfort they could never have imagined. May your rest tonight be as deep and undisturbed as the rest those ancient soldiers desperately sought after their exhausting days. May you wake tomorrow refreshed, renewed, and profoundly grateful that the strange, tedious, uncomfortable daily life of ancient Roman soldiers is something you will only ever experience through historical description rather than through lived reality. Sleep peacefully now. Good night. May dreams of comfortable modern life replace any lingering images of cold Roman military camps, and may the profound boredom of this examination finally release you into peaceful, comfortable, well-deserved sleep. Rest now in the knowledge that this exhaustive examination of ancient military tedium has finally concluded, and that you, unlike those Roman soldiers, have the freedom to simply stop thinking about it and drift into peaceful, comfortable sleep whenever you choose. Good night. Sleep well in your warm, comfortable bed, grateful beyond measure. Good night, and may you never grind grain or stand cold watches. Sleep peacefully. May your dreams be free from military tedium and filled only with comfort.